Okay, all right. Well, thanks for being here, everyone. We're going to get started now. Thanks for your patience. Special welcome to our friends online, especially those of you tuning in from the West Coast. We know this is not a convenient time slot, so we thank you for your flexibility. We're trying a different time now so we can have our live audience here. Special shout out to some SAR dignitaries, PG Gist, President General of the SAR 1995-96. We have Librarian General Keith Weisinger in the back, and Library Committee Chairman Osborne in the back as well. So thank you for being here with us. So tonight we're going to take a pretty quick look at some of the objects that we're going to feature in the SAR Education Center and Museum. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. We're trying to balance seeing more objects and maybe doing about 2-3 minutes an object, but I'll be here afterward for questions. So if you have a question about something, either drop it in the chat and Drew will relay that to me, or I'll be here afterwards for the live audience as well. So we're going to do kind of a survey of the American Revolution. This is not a class. This is meant to be enjoyable. So we're not going to hit every single battle or every act that we revolted against, but we're going to go through and look at some of the objects in the SAR collection that we can use to tell that story. So Drew, if you want to pop to the overhead, we are going to dive right in. Let me get this up here for y'all and get that to focus. So this is a silver christening cup, and let me hit. Thank you for your patience while I work through some technical difficulties here at the end. There we go. So you can see there are some initials on here. MJW, these are for Margaret Wemple. Margaret actually celebrated her 300th birthday in December. She was born in December 1724, and this is a silver christening cup. And these are a very particularly significant object for colonial America. There was not a lot of currency floating around in what would become the United States, all of the North American colonies at that point. So this was given to Margaret when she was christened or baptized. And at that time, you would give silver because silver was thought to promote health and wealth. So this is silver, so it has tangible value. So it is like a savings account. So in colonial North America, where there's not a lot of property that you can grab, a lot of your wealth is actually tied up in your land or your home. So this is something that Margaret could grab on the way out of the home if there was an emergency. And that is really pressed. That point is really pressed because this actually has a coin incorporated into the base. If I can get this to focus, I'm sorry, it's so shiny. There it is. So this is actually a French Louis XIV coin, and you can see a little bit of Louis's face there in the bottom. So this was given to Margaret as a gift, but it's also today like we might give a savings bond to a young child when they're growing up. And what's really remarkable is Margaret went on to marry Jacob Vroman, who served in the Revolution, as did her son Simon Vroman, and that's actually part of a larger collection that was donated to the SAR. And we thank Tim Ward of the Ohio Society, who donated that whole collection in memory of Ralph Sackett Jr. But this is a really rare example. A lot of these christening cups were turned into other silver objects. So we don't have a lot of 18th century examples, but this is a pretty rare example where we actually know who the initials are for. So Margaret grew up in an era prior or while she was still a British subject. And Drew, if you could just come up quick, I'm just going to show everybody at home size of what we're looking at here. This is a contract musket made by Richard Wilson of London, and we are grateful to Jim and Terry Lindley of the Washington Society for donating this. And what is significant about this is, if we go back to the overhead, this is actually marked back here for the colony of New Jersey. So this was actually ordered by the colony of New Jersey during the French and Indian War. They had to arm their own troops, and all the North American colonies in this war with the French wanted to be patriotic and supportive. So New Jersey is actually known for having some of the most well-equipped troops during the French and Indian War. So this is one of those muskets. We know New Jersey ordered about 2,700 Richard Wilson muskets. You can actually see right here by my thumb. and RW for Richard Wilson. Let me get that down there. Thanks for your patience while we get this to focus. So you can see there's London proof marks, RW for Richard Wilson. So this is one with that New Jersey here on the butt plate, and then on the bottom, it's kind of hard to see, but there's also a 52 right there above my finger. That's a rack number. So that's when these are being issued. And New Jersey did a really good job of getting these back because they would actually withhold about 25% of a soldier's pay that they wouldn't get until they return their musket at the end of service. But so New Jersey had these during the French and Indian War. While they are, they are proud, they are British, and they're proud to be part of the British Empire. Eventually, this musket would have been pulled back out and was reissued during the American Revolution. This is a replacement lock, probably put on there at the beginning of the American Revolution. We're not going to jump too far ahead, but this is what a lot of colonists would have been fighting with during the French and Indian War, and then also for doing militia duty, sheriff duty, things like that. So, pretty remarkable survivor. We're very happy to have this one. Hand this off to Jacob. Okay, so we're after the French and Indian War, and we are now looking at a what are sometimes called a GR Westerwald tankard. The GR on here stands for Georgius Rex, King George. This is probably for King George II. This was likely made in the 1750s, and it's called Westerwald because it's made in the Westerwald region of Germany. Prior to the American Revolution, British subjects in North America were very proud to be British. They were proud of their life. They truly felt that they were part of the greatest society to ever exist since the Roman Empire. So something like this could have been found in a tavern. These would be proudly displayed in people's homes. We actually know that at Mount Vernon, they have found sherds of GR Westerwald implements. So had you gone to Mount Vernon, you might be served your ale or wine or something like that in a vessel like this. And it's just very subtly showing your patriotism, but it's also reminding you who's in charge. So during that era, we're starting to move towards the revolution. There was a pretty remarkable young lady named Phyllis Wheatley. She was captured in probably what is Gambia around 1760. She was enslaved and brought to Boston, and she very quickly learned English and became a young poet. And what we have here, thanks to the library committee purchase, is a copy of the May and September Gentleman's Magazine from London, in which Phyllis Wheatley, as a 21-year-old, let me get to the page here for you. As a 21-year-old enslaved woman is actually publishing poetry on the international stage. So this is appearing in this publication. This is not the first time her poem right here, On Recollection. You can actually see underneath here, it says, this piece is taken from a small collection of poems on various subjects, just published, written by Phyllis Wheatley, a Negro of Boston who was brought from Africa in 1761 and is now only in the 21st year of her age. So she was a pretty remarkable character, and actually her slaveholder was eager to work with her, and they brought her to London to help her publish her works. And so she really became part of this broader conversation about, the role of slavery in the American Revolution. And she is the first African-American woman to publish poetry in what would become the United States. But she was a pro-revolutionary and later wrote a poem called His Excellency General Washington, and her and Washington actually corresponded during the war, and he praised her efforts. So we are hoping to eventually get a copy of her 1773 published poems, but this is a pretty rare example of her work showing up in the Gentleman's Magazine. So she's living in a time where she's really participating in broader society, but she can see that there's unrest really starting to happen, and we are quickly glossing over all of the acts that we all learned in school, the Tea Act, the Intolerable Acts, things like that. But so as we're moving into the mid-1770s, you move on to First Continental Congress. And at First Continental Congress in October 1774, they agreed on a non-importation agreement, which would have covered objects like this. This is a 1770s imported Indian chintz textile, so that's coming from India. These were very favored in Europe and in North America because Indian merchants figured out a way to get these dyes to set into the fabric in a way that you could actually wash them. So fabric like this is being imported into North America by the yard, and that could be turned into a men's waistcoat. It could be turned into bed curtains. It could be turned into home curtains. There's actually examples of men's jackets made out of this. Women's dresses are being made out of this. So this would have been a very highly sought after material. And you can see it's very elegant. And this is pretty distinctively Indian design, but they're incorporating European flowers in there. This is made expressly for export to the European market. This is being imported into North America, but under the non-importation agreement of First Continental Congress, this would have become persona non grata. So to be seen wearing Indian chintz after First Continental Congress would be seen as an unpatriotic act. And so you start to have what's called homespun. So there are different versions of this being made in North America. And that's a way that women really participated in the revolution. They started producing their own fabric at home. And although all of the members of First Continental Congress were men, the chief enforcers of the non-importation agreement were women. They were really the ones who were the consumers of the household. They were the ones really making the decisions. So they were really the ones that saw to it that a household was going to be a good patriotic household. But this is a really rare surviving example of just a fragment, and we are appreciative to the Missouri Auxiliary for donating this. Okay, so we've had First Continental Congress. We're moving into they call the long year of revolution, 1774 into 75. So after First Continental Congress, this sermon was preached by Mr. Lathrop. Get back to here we go, John Lathrop. So this was preached in Boston December 15th, 1774, being the day recommended by the Provincial Congress, First Continental Congress, to be observed in thanksgiving to God for blessings enjoyed and humiliation on account of public calamities. So this was a public day of fasting and of prayer, but this is really an example where John Lathrop was a preacher, but he was also a firebrand and a revolutionary. There was a lot of political discussion happening from the pulpit at that time, and preachers played a really big role. John Lathrop he's one example of a preacher who actually stayed in his congregation through the duration of the war, but is definitely seen as a revolutionary. There are other sermons in the SAR's collection from the same time period where they tried to preach, but they couldn't help themselves, and they ended up with a regiment in the field marching with them. But we are very pleased to have this one, and it was donated by Bobby and Deborah Hulse in honor of Chaplain General Vernon Welkner and Reverend Canon John Ashley Null, who all played a significant role in acquiring this particular example. Okay, so let me hand this off to Jacob. And Drew, if we could come back up so everybody can get a quick peek. If you are a regular on selections from the collection, you might get tired of seeing this, but it's just so cool, we can't stop talking about it. So we're moving past First Continental Congress, and in early 1775, we move from political revolution to open warfare. And Drew, if we could go to the overhead, and we'll take a look at who made this particular firearm. This was donated by Charles Card of Louisville, Kentucky, in the Kentucky Society, and P.G. Gist may have actually played a part in helping to get this at the SAR. But you can see right here, let me turn this overhead off so you can see it a little bit better. You can see the name there, Pomeroy. That is for Seth Pomeroy. He is one of these figures who, when you study colonial, especially Massachusetts, he just pops up everywhere from about the 1730s to the 1770s. He is what's called a snowshoe man, which is a proto-Minuteman. He is at the Siege of Louisbourg in 1745. He is at Ticonderoga during the French and Indian War. He is a sheriff. He is a gunsmith. So he is not making these, lock, stock, and barrel. He is importing parts and cobbling these together. But this is one that he made. And Seth Pomeroy is also very well known for riding through the night to get to Boston. He fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill, likely with a firearm that he made himself. So it probably would have been similar to this one. But this is currently one of only two of Seth Pomeroy's firearms that are in a public collection. The other one's on display in Philadelphia right now at the Museum of the American Revolution. But he put his name on here, and part of that is trying to get that to focus for you. Typically, you would expect to see S. Pomeroy for Seth Pomeroy, but part of this is that this is coming out of a workshop, and his household was pretty unique that he's going off and he is serving, and there are surviving letters where he's writing home to his wife, and she's saying, Colonel so-and-so's firearm is ready. How much should I charge him? So-and-so came in with a broken lock. What should I charge him for that? So while he's out serving, his wife continues running the gunsmith shop with her sons helping. But Seth Pomeroy actually is the first person that Congress offers a brigadier general commission to serve under George Washington, and he turns it down so he can stay in the Massachusetts militia because he can see the siege of Boston starting in 1775. But what's also remarkable about this gun is it's made out of salvaged French parts. That is a French trigger guard on there. So these are probably components that made their way into Massachusetts after the French and Indian War. And so, this was owned by a family called the Noyes family, Noyes. And this particular firearm was carried by Peleg Noyes of the 8th Connecticut Militia. He was the captain. But this is not a military-grade firearm. This is a hunting gun. And as I said, this has some French components on it. And get this back around here. So these French hunting guns, this is also what you would have encountered with a lot of Native American combatants in the Revolution. They would have been fighting with these hunting guns. We know that the French in Canada were trading beaver pelts for guns that looked very similar to this one. So this is a firearm that you can fight with, but it is also a hunting gun. So Seth Pomeroy, pretty remarkable character. I recommend you look into him a little bit more. Just trying to give you some good overalls there. Okay, so Battle of Bunker Hill has happened. We are in open conflict at this point. We're going to take a look here. Let me get this off here so you can see this a little bit better. What we are looking at here is a late 1775 muster roll for Colonel Reuben Dickinson's regiment. It's not dated, but we have cross-referenced some of the individuals on here, and pretty significantly up here at the top, get my finger here, is Sergeant Daniel Shays, who later after the war would lead Shays' Rebellion. So he is this day not fit for duty. But more remarkably at the bottom of this, let me get this out here for you. We have here just above my fingers, Asahel and Eber Wood. Asahel and Eber Wood were brothers, and they were enslaved prior to the American Revolution. They escaped from their slaveholder to get to a regiment where they signed up for service. We're not sure if they had patriotic fervor or if they saw an opportunity to emancipate themselves, but luckily they both survived the war. They served for the duration, and they both got pensions. So we have pension statements from them along with corroborating statements. So we really know everywhere that they were. And Asahel actually was one of a handful of black soldiers who fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill. So we have really good records with them. We're still looking into them, but very rare example of muster roll documenting the service of African-American soldiers during the Revolution. But so this is also indicative of a lot of muster rolls that you see early on. This is for militia, so very quickly got into open conflict. So They were kind of building it in the air, so to speak, with the types of paperwork they were using, and really doing the best they could. All right, thanks, Drew. Okay, so I'm going to hold this up so you can see a little bit overall. This is unfortunately a replacement haft, so this is not the length it would have been when it was originally made. It would have been probably several feet longer. So I'm about 6'2", and it would have originally been about this high for who would have used it. But what's significant about this one, if we go back to the overhead, move this up for you. Come up a little bit further. So the British are pushed out of Boston after Continentals take Dorchester Heights. And then the British arrive in North America with the largest army that had been assembled in Europe in a long time. They arrive in New York Harbor in July 1776 with over 30,000 soldiers. And among them are German troops, which we sometimes today called Hessians. This is actually properly a Hessian spontoon. Here on the blade is FL for Friedrich Landgraf, who is actually cousins with George III. So he is the German prince who really starts this kind of lend-lease program, so to speak, with the British Army. But this is his monogram on here, where we know that this would have been produced between 1760 and 1785 during his reign. But some of these would have made their way to North America, and this is definitely a fighting weapon. You know, you could use this to fight if need be, but really, this is a piece of insignia. This is for sergeants. They would have carried these, and they would have been used to give orders in the field. And you can see very little bit. There's some gold leaf left in here, but this crown and the FL letters would have originally been filled with gold leaf, so it would have really gleamed, and these would have been polished to a very high shine. So there's actually accounts of Continental soldiers talking about how well the German troops maintained their equipment, and you could see them coming from a long way off because their spontoons and bayonets gleamed in the sunlight, and it was really a way of intimidating your enemy before you got there. But we are thankful to P.G. Darrell Addington, P.G. Joe Dooley, Bruce Bueller, and John Bredenforder for all working together to help get this into the SAR collection. So when I said properly Hessian, so Friedrich Landgraf is the Prince of Hesse Castle. So his troops actually are called Hessians. We generally refer to all German troops during the Revolution as Hessians, but that is not correct. There were actually 6 different principalities. So there were Brunswickers, there were a bunch of different other German princes who sent, but the majority of the German troops in North America were Hessian. Okay. Sorry, thank you, Jacob. Okay, so the Continental Army is kicked out of New York pretty handily. They returned into New Jersey, and we have the 10 crucial days at the end of 1776-77, but the British eventually do capture Philadelphia. And after they leave Philadelphia, or after the Continental Army leaves Philadelphia along with Continental Congress, they retreat out into Pennsylvania. And one of the places they go is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where there was a Moravian settlement. And what we have here is actually a tinder lighter from the Sun Inn. Just to focus for you. These shiny surfaces are tricky. So the Sun Inn in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania was a hotel on the edge of the Moravian settlement. This is where people who were coming to visit the Moravians would stay because they did not let outsiders into their settlement. So what this is a tinder lighter. So it looks like a small pistol, and it actually functions the same way. So you have a flint and a striker up here, and you would cock this, and you would fire it, which would create a spark, and it would go down into this box. So you would put some type of tinder, either like really finely ground birch bark or some cotton or something like that that would catch really easily in there. You would close this, you would cock it, and you would fire it, and that would create hopefully a small flame in there. And then on this tube in the side, you would have a candle in there. So once there's a fire, you open this, grab your candle, and you light your candle. So this is the best thing they had next to a match at that time. So matches were not invented until about the 1830s. So keeping either light or a source of heat readily available all the time was a big advantage or a necessary part of everyday life at that time. But this one being marked from the sun in is pretty remarkable because the Moravians are a good reminder that not everybody who was in North America at that time was necessarily a patriot or a loyalist. The Moravians just wanted to be left alone. The British showed up, they sacked Bethlehem, they took everything, they kind of thought they'd gotten the worst of it. Philadelphia falls, and then the Continental Army and Continental Congress show up, and there are journals from Bethlehem just saying, like, when are we going to be left alone? We don't want any part of this revolution. But they did host Continental Congress because they were pacifists. So John Adams, George Washington, several other members of First Continental Congress stayed at the Sun Inn. And we are thankful to Tom Jackson of Texas for donating this to the SAR collection. So Continental Army is ejected from Philadelphia. They're making their way out into Pennsylvania. End of 1777, they make their way into the encampment at Valley Forge, where this portrait is done. This is, see if I can get this. There we go. Thank you for your patience while we get all these shiny objects to show up for you. This is Dr. James Craik, and this was painted by Charles Willson Peale at Valley Forge in April and May of 1778. Dr. Craik was actually George Washington's close friend and personal physician. They met on the Braddock campaign in 1755, and they both survived, and Washington convinced Craik to move to Virginia to be his personal physician. So at the beginning of the Revolution, Dr. Craik signs up, and he becomes a Surgeon General. So what he is in here is actually civilian clothing. That is not a Continental Army uniform. Surgeon Generals were never issued uniforms during the Revolution. They were just given suggestions of what they should wear. So he is wearing a military type jacket, but that is all civilian clothing. But so he had this done at Valley Forge, probably for his wife, would have sent it home. But Dr. Craik is at Valley Forge, and he is tending to the soldiers there. And later on, he actually is in charge of the hospitals at Yorktown. But so he and George Washington remain close personal friends, and he's actually one of the attending physicians at Washington's death. And unfortunately, Dr. Craik is one of the doctors who suggested to continue taking pint after pint after pint of blood out of Washington. You know, they did remain close personal friends till the end of the war, and luckily, a Craik descendant, James and Mary Craik of Louisville, Kentucky, donated this. Dr. Craik's descendants moved to Kentucky in the early 19th century, and so this remained in the Craik family and went through female descent in the family, and that is how it ended up at the SAR. But so Dr. Craik was at Valley Forge, where the Continental Army is really forged into a fighting force. They come out, and several battles ensue. Drew, you are on it. So, a lot. Yeah, that is really one of the premier objects in the SAR's collection. So just coming up, just quick overhead of this. This is a French conglomeration musket. All right, Drew, if we want to go back to the overhead. So the Continental Army comes out of Valley Forge really as a formidable fighting force. They're really ready to start fighting. They've proven themselves. And so France actually agrees to start providing supplies to the Continental Army. So this is one of the first 17,000 muskets supplied to the Continental Army by France. It arrived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on the ship Amphitrite on April 20th or 21st, 1777. And the reason we call it a conglomeration musket is that this is not a recognized pattern. This is The French went into their warehouses and they pulled out a 1754 butt plate, a 1763 lock, a 1773 barrel, and they just cobbled it together. But this is the type of firearm that France is really supplying, and these start showing up in early 1777, which is a full year between or before the Treaty of Alliance. So these are really coming in covertly. And what's really remarkable about this one is that it is marked right here on the barrel, NH for New Hampshire. Now that is, back this way right here, NH for New Hampshire. So this one arrived in Portsmouth and went into the state arsenal of New Hampshire and actually remained a part of the New Hampshire arsenal until the mid-19th century. And then this one ended up on the walls of the governor's palace until it was sold to the public. So we have good records of this one. But this is the type of firearm that is making its way in 1777, up into New York and actually really helps turn the tide at Saratoga. So these muskets are making their way in. We have another brand on the stock here, NH, and then probably the American soldiers' initials here, SW. This is another example or another mark that we know this is used by an American. To put your initials on a firearm in the French or British Army like this would get you publicly flogged. You do not alter your firearm. But this is the type of musket that eventually the Continental Army gets over 100,000 of by the end of the war. And really, that French assistance really helped turn the tide. So after Burgoyne's surrender at Saratoga, as we say, the war turned south. So the British alter their plans and they start moving troops south. And so to prepare for that, in places like Virginia, the militias are being enlarged. So what we have here is a commission for Robert White, and it is from 1779, and it is signed by then Governor Thomas Jefferson. So Robert White actually was fighting during the Northern Campaign, and he broke his leg during a battle, was captured by the British, and spent about 16 months in British captivity. He is exchanged, makes his way back to Virginia, where he is recovering and is convinced to come out of recovery to help do administrative duties for the militia. But this is really part of that buildup as the war moves south. Those local militia units are being enlarged. And this is also the type of document that an officer would have carried at all times. As you can see, this one has these fold marks here. That's because if Robert White would have been traveling around as he goes from base to base, this is like a military ID, a passport, a personal ID. You would show up, and with that signature of the governor on there, they know you are who you say you are. So he would have had this folded up in a breast pocket, in a wallet, something like that, carried with him at all times. So we are very grateful to the Virginia Society for donating this. Okay. So once again, as the war moves south, the nature of the fighting really changes. In the north, you're seeing a lot more troops against troops of formations, but as the war moves south, you're looking at much more of a mounted type of fighting, a lot more cavalry. But this is a sword that we believe was made by Jeremiah Snow of Springfield, Massachusetts. He was a jeweler and a goldsmith prior to the Revolution, and with the onset of hostilities, we believe he was like, I could probably start putting swords together. So he starts importing. This is a Spanish blade. If we could go to the overhead quick, Drew. Thank you. So these 3 fullers or grooves on here, these actually help make the blade stronger by putting these in here, but having these 3 that is very distinctly Spanish. So Spain was another foreign power subtly sending supplies to the American Revolution. So Jeremiah Snow is importing these blades, probably working with a local woodworker to make these, and then he is making the hilts. So there are dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of these swords. And this, like most of them, is unmarked. But recently, in the past about 30 years, a few examples have shown up with Jeremiah Snow's maker's mark on them right about here. And it's the same as his mark that he puts on silver spoons, plates, things like that. And so, what historians determined was that he is making these swords. They're probably, they're being issued, maybe sent south. But essentially, he's making equipment for a rebellious army. What he's doing technically is treasonous, so you probably don't want to sign your work. Towards the end of the war, once it looks like the Continental Army is going to win, he starts signing his work. So there's about 3 or 4 examples known that have the IS or JS Jeremiah Snow stamp on there. But this is really the type of weapon, when you think about casualties during the American Revolution, this is really what is doing the business, so to speak. The majority of casualties in the Revolution were killed or hurt by edged weapons. So this is a pretty long blade, and you can see it has this slight curve that's really made for use from horseback, and that helps you reach down, and the curve of the blade helps you transfer energy into the target. But this is another one. We're very grateful to Jim and Terry Lindley for donating this. Okay, take another quick look. So sticking with the Southern campaign, this is a miniature portrait of Archibald Campbell done by John Bogle in Scotland. See if we can get Archibald to show up here for you. I promise this worked better in the practice run. So Archibald Campbell was a Scottish aristocrat. He signed up pretty early in the war, and he actually was captured in Boston Harbor in 1776 and spent about 2 years in captivity with the Continental Army. He was a pretty high-profile figure, though, and he was exchanged for Ethan Allen, who captured Fort Ticonderoga early in the war and was then captured. So Archibald Campbell is sent back to the British, and soon after he is released, he's sent south with an army of 3,000, where he captures Savannah, continues inland, and captures Augusta in Georgia. So he is effectively one of the last royal governors of Georgia. After he captures Augusta, he heads home to Scotland when this portrait is done, probably for his wife or sister or a daughter. And it's actually signed very small right here. I'm not going to try to get it to show up for you. We have pictures on our website if you'd like to see it up close. But he probably had this done before he then left again to head back and become governor of Jamaica, where he served for 3 years, which was a very big deal in the British Empire. Jamaica produced more wealth for the British Empire than all the 13 colonies combined. So that was a huge responsibility. But this is one that we're very pleased to have. It was acquired through the Curator's Discretionary Fund, but is actually signed on the front and the back. Okay, so since we are in Louisville, we have to talk about George Rogers Clark. This is a land treasury warrant issued to, just above my fingers here, George Rogers Clark. So actually where we all are at for the in-person audience at SAR headquarters, we are on the outskirts of what would have been Fort Nelson, right on the Ohio River. George Rogers Clark went to Vincennes, and he's really trying to maintain the gains that had been made out here in the West. So the Virginia legislature, instead of sending him money to expand his troops, typically new troops signing up would get a bounty, so they would, don't quote me on this figure, but they would essentially say, if you sign up today, you're going to get a $150 bonus. Out here on the frontier, that money doesn't do you as good or as much good. So the Virginia government sends George Rogers Clark these certificates, which he can hand out for bounties, and gives those soldiers 460 acres of land. So it's a big incentive to sign up. And these are a lot of the troops who are being stationed here at Fort Nelson. They're in southern Ohio and in Indiana, and a lot of these soldiers ended up settling in the immediate area here. But this is certificate 2331. We still need to do some research and figure out who this was given to. But we are hopeful to find out who this was issued to and then hopefully if they survived where they settled after the war. So the war in the West has been raging, mostly dies down. The Southern campaign really rages. We're really glossing over a lot of years and battles, but we're going to skip ahead to Yorktown, where we believe Captain John Armstrong would have carried this powder horn. This was recently donated to the SAR by Susan Denning Hinton, Ellen Denning Smith, and Richard A. Denning of the Missouri Society, who are all direct descendants of John Armstrong. And I was recently corresponding with Ellen, who is a direct descendant, and we've actually found an 1838 will that cites this specific powder horn, saying that John Armstrong carried it in the war. And then he also carried it after the war when he served in the 1st American Regiment, which would have been out here in the Ohio River Valley. And he carried this on Harmar's campaign. And on that campaign, it broke. And so he shot a squirrel and put the pelt on here to fix it. John Armstrong was at Yorktown, potentially had this powder horn with him, but he was part of that whole campaign as Washington moves the army south to trap Cornwallis. He's part of the Battle of Greenspring, and he's actually serving under Anthony Wayne in the Marquis de Lafayette. But Armstrong ended up serving a full 17 years in the United States military, when that was pretty rare that early on to be doing that. But this is a great example of the type of powder horn that would have been being used by an individual soldier. This is really made to carry on your hip, so that curve is really preferred. I could do a whole presentation on this one, and maybe we will one day. All right, last quick look at that. So after Yorktown, the war is not over. There's still fighting going on. But for all intents and purposes, the heavy fighting is over. So we're going to skip ahead to 1783, when Continental Congress instructs Washington to start discharging the army. We know the Treaty of Paris is coming down the road, and really the army is sitting around, and these guys are just racking up bounty lands and pay, things like that. So Congress tells Washington he needs to start discharging the army. And so he has these certificates partially printed near Fishkill, New York, which is where the army was encamped at that time. And this one is for Sergeant, sorry, one second. Sergeant Robert Wilkinson. Want to make sure I had that right. And it's signed June 8th, 1783. And it's actually signed right above my finger here by Washington. So he had these certificates printed for the more senior members of the military. He knew what these guys had been through, and he knew he could not pay them a lot of specie on the spot, but the least he could do is personally sign their discharges as a token of esteem. So this is one that the Library Committee recently acquired, and so this would have also acted as that land warrant. So Robert Wilkinson would have probably turned this into a land office to get his land. But also down here at the bottom, you can see that he also got the Badge of Merit. Now, that is not the Badge of Military Merit, which is the Purple Heart. This is the Badge of Merit, which was an award during the American Revolution where you got the right to wear a chevron on the left sleeve for every 3 years of service. So he was given 8 years faithful service. So Sergeant Wilkinson would have had 2 chevrons on the left sleeve, indicating to everyone that he was a senior member of the military at that point. But once again, you can see that after Washington signed this, he was discharged. He folded it up and stuck it in his pocket and went home and got on with his life. So let me just get this fragile document out of here. Thanks for your patience. So the Treaty of Paris comes in, and the war is over. Now starts the work of governing. We've started a new government. We've established a new country. We just fought a war. Now we need to pay for it. So this is one of only 3 copies of the complete register of certificates by John Pierce. This is a published record. This is a complete record of Congress's payments to soldiers of the Continental Army, minus South Carolina because they got a special provision. But so this is essentially a very long register of payments. And the SAR has one of only 3 complete copies of the original printing. And this is a pretty remarkable one too, because you can see somebody was actually using it. Let me turn it for you here. They made notations where they tell you from 15901 to 15990 are issued twice. So somebody was going through here line by line, and they're also correcting names. They've gone back and they're cross-referencing. But so this is really part of, founding a new government. You got to pay the bills. The Revolutionary War was not inexpensive, and it was largely only able to be fought because of France and Spain's support, and individuals like Robert Morris who really helped fund it. But this is really that line-by-line accounting at the end of the war. A pretty remarkable look at the early bureaucracy. So after the war is over, we're settling accounts. We go through the Articles or the Confederation period, and we move into passing the Constitution. And finally, we end in 1789 with the inauguration of the first president, George Washington. Let's see if I can get this to focus for you. This is a original 1789 inaugural button. So this is really, if you think about it, this is the first political pin in the United States. So you can see in the middle there, George W. These were made and sold in New York City where the inauguration happened. And so this is not a button that you would use to fasten a coat, so to speak, but would really be worn, it would be sewn to the jacket or the lapel, and these would be worn to the inauguration. And these are also a good indication that we were very recently British and trying to figure ourselves out. So they tried to come up with a fresh slogan, and the best they could come up with was "Long live the president." But there's actually 8 different variations of these. But we're very grateful to Mike and Julie Elson of Virginia for donating this to the SAR. And this one is in remarkably good condition. I'm really getting in the weeds here, but it still has the loop on the back. So these are often not found in that good of a condition. So that concludes our brief and quick fly-through of the Revolutionary period. Again, these are all objects that will be featured in the SAR Education Center and Museum. And with that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes?
Is that e-book, is that information digitized and available online someplace?
Yeah, so the question is Pierce's Register digitized and available? And the answer is yes, it is. The DAR actually published it in 1913, but it is readily available. In fact, we have other copies here in the SAR available that you can look at. If you really want to look at this one, we could make arrangements, but we prefer you use a reprint. That is actually was on loan. Sorry, the question was, do we still have the George Rogers Clark painting? I suspect you are talking about the portrait. Yeah, that was actually on loan from the Filson, and it went back to the Filson Society. Unless it is a different one, but we can talk afterwards. Do we have any online questions?
Yeah, we have one online question. Rob Moore asks, what is the difference between a spontoon and a halberd?
Very good question, Rob. The question was, what's the difference between a spontoon and a halberd? So the spontoon that we looked at, here I can describe it very quickly, is shaped like this. You're really thinking more of a spear point, versus a halberd is that leftover from the medieval era where it's going to look like an axe on one side. If you really think like Swiss papal guard, that is a halberd, whereas a spontoon is this cleaner blade shape with a single crossbar. Can I give that back to you? Yeah. Yeah, so this originally would have had, this is a replacement half, so it would have been longer, and it would have had a metal cap on the end for sticking it into the ground. Sometimes these would be stuck into the ground outside of a tent to let you know that the sergeant is in, but I'll turn to the side here. So during March, every unit had different regulations, but essentially this would be stop, half forward, half reverse, full retreat, present arms. So different ways of holding it because on a battlefield it's very loud and you're not going to be able to maybe shout. But if you look over and your sergeant is holding this very shiny spontoon, you're going to be able to find it. And then you can also find him on the battlefield. And so these were also used by the Continental Army as well. But really, by the time of the American Revolution, the British Army had gotten away from spontoons and were giving sergeants firearms. Okay.
He asks, what is the difference between a hunting rifle and a fighting?
So the difference is, so I should say this is a Fowler. Sorry, the question was, what's the difference between a hunting rifle and a fighting rifle? And the quick answer is the SRA actually does not have any rifles in the collection. There were rifles used in the American Revolution, but they were pretty cutting edge technology. This is, yeah, I can just pick this up quick. So this is a hunting Fowler, and it's called a Fowler because it's literally made for sitting on a riverbank and hunting waterfowl. This is a very long shotgun, so to speak. So this is a smaller bore, and this longer bore helps you keep a tighter cluster because this is shooting shot. So essentially like a shotgun would be used today. So these are for hunting birds and small games. And this is what, especially at the beginning of the Revolution, and throughout the Revolution as well, especially for militia, this is what they are fighting with. I hand you this, and then I will grab this one. So this Richard Wilson contract, this is a military grade firearm. You can see it is shorter, it is stockier, it has a much larger bore. You're shooting a single bullet out of here. Usually in the British Army, you're shooting about an 80 caliber. For the French, they're shooting about a 69. But really, you're shooting a single large bullet out of this. And if you look at the more you look at them side by side, this is just a bigger, chunkier, more robust weapon. Piece of equipment, rather.
I was surprised when you said there were more casualties from edged weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because of the lack of accuracy that we've all heard about from this era's firearms, or the edged weapons are just more ubiquitous, or?
Yeah, so really, a lot of different answers to that, but part of it, what's that? Yeah, I'm sorry for those online. The question was, why were edged weapons the most lethal weapon on the battlefield during the American Revolution versus firearms? The answer is that firearms were not as accurate. Really, with the musket that we looked at, you're looking at an accuracy of about 100 yards. A good soldier could hit a man-sized target, but even with the type of ammunition they were using, it really lost velocity as it went. So it would it would definitely knock you down. It would hurt. It could take you out. But it's low enough energy that those will essentially bounce off of bones, if that gives you a sense. And so the way a battle would work is that the troops would line up, they would march toward each other, they would do 2, 3, maybe 4 volleys, and then it's fixed bayonets. And that is where a lot of the business is being done.
Color and the cloth that came from India.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was duplicated. What was the product used to cause the color or to produce the color?
Yeah, so I know, if we go to the overhead really quick, Drew. Yeah. The question was, what is being used to produce the dyes in the chintz and what were being used in India and then in North America? So in India, you're looking at indigo for the blue. I can't remember the exact name of the mineral, but they're really using a lot of different minerals and they're being very highly refined. There are, the reason this is called chintz textiles because it's coming from the city of Chintz in India, which was really like a one industry city. Everything there had to do with weaving, color production, producing this. So they were producing really high quality dyes, really high quality fabrics. And then when you start seeing homespun in the early years of the war, they're also going to be using indigo. A lot of colonial herb gardens included indigo, but other naturally occurring dyes as well. Some of the darker ones, you can get from lampblack, like which is what ink is made out of. So it's just carbon. You could also make it from blueberries, different types of fruits, naturally occurring things like that. But those are not going to set as well. And then you're also going to be, they just could not produce the quality of cloth in North America either. I hope that answered the question. Okay, well, thank you all for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this. And if you've not toured the museum gallery yet for the in-person or for the live audience, we encourage you to do so. And thank you for tuning in online. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us in the future. And we look forward to inviting you. We look forward to welcoming you to the museum in the future. Thank you.